is Kefentse Chike, and you're listening to us on TV 33 WHPR. This is the Get Up Stand Up Show with Minister Malik Shabazz. You're watching the Black in the Day and the 313 segment, an Afrocentric perspective of African and African American phenomena from an Afrocentric perspective. I'm elated and actually to take a line from Les Brown. It's a plum pleasing pleasure to have in studio and on the line, hopefully soon, three distinguished scholars, colleagues, and friends, brothers that have a wealth of knowledge, information, and history of service to the African and African American community, actually globally. To my right and your left is Dr. Akinyele Umoja, who is an associate professor and the current chair of African American Studies at Georgia State University. And he's a scholar that studies social movements, and maybe you could say a little more about your other work. He has several publications dealing with the Black Power movement. Currently has a book out called And We Shoot Back.
We Will Shoot Back.
We Will Shoot Back. And to my left, a very good friend, colleague, and another distinguished scholar and the current chair of Wayne State University's African American Studies Department, and a scholar on African or Black politics in Brazil. Political scientist, you're a historian, is that correct?
Yes.
Dr. Ollie Johnson, and we hope soon to have Dr. Sundiata Chajua, am I saying his name correctly?
Yeah, that's it.
Who's also a historian, associate professor at University of Illinois at, is it Urbana or Champaign?
Champaign-Urbana.
Champaign, formerly the director of the African American Studies Department and the chair of, the president of the National Council of Black Studies. So we have a four-pack of African-centered Black Studies scholars.
Yes, sir.
And the feature for the short time we have with you, we've been, it's been an honor to have Dr. Umoja here with us. Actually, for the weekend, you gave a talk this Saturday with Dr. Sundiata and Dr. Melba Boyd. And maybe you can help me clarify the title, but it was dealing with the racial oppressions between 68 and 73 in response to the historical rebellions of the Black Power movement. And hopefully I'll do this right, I'm going to try to bring in the caller. Good evening and welcome to Get Up Stand Up. Could you tell us your name, please?
Sundiata Chajua.
All right, welcome, Bob. I just introduced you. Now stay on the line. I'm gonna try to lock you in so that I can keep you on the line. Okay?
Okay.
Are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay. So we got all the way, I'm assuming in Illinois, Dr. Sundiata Chajua. To my left,
Yes.
Dr. Ollie Johnson. To my right, Dr. Akinyele Umoja, and I'm Baba Kefentse, Dr. Chike, and we are the Black Studies Powerhouse. So the focus of the talk, and maybe if you could talk a little maybe about the talk the other day, but I really wanted to focus on tomorrow's talk, which will be in, should I announce the location? I know it's not a big room, but tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. in Old Main in room 137, Dr. Umoja will be giving a talk on Black Studies and Black politics. So for the short time we have, the next 30 minutes or so, maybe you could begin to give us a little preview of your talk, and hopefully Dr. Sundiata and of course Ollie Johnson can kind of bring this in, talk about the significance of Black Studies. We know Black Studies started with a sit-in at Wayne State, and actually I shouldn't say with a sit-in at Wayne State, because prior to the formalized Black Studies department, there was a center that goes back, was it 15 years prior to 1989? My math is not that good. Is that
20 years.
20 years?
I think so.
Okay, but there was a center, and then in 89, about 15 or 20 students, and my math might be off on that as well, took over the building, the Helen Newberry Joy building, and they occupied that building for about 10 to 15 days, demanding a full autonomous African American Studies department. Now that was in 89, but we know in 1968 the first African American Studies department was formed at San Francisco State, which grew out of rebellion and struggle. And in fact, and you all can help me to be honest, African American Studies is the only historical discipline that grew out of the political protests in civil disobedience, and it's one of the remaining and still sustained efforts of rebellion from the Black Power movement. So with that being said, could you all talk to us a little more about Black studies and Black politics and help us to understand the relevance of Black studies today, particularly as it relates to politics and the lives of African people?
And that's part of what we'll address tomorrow is the origins. I'm not sure if our students know those origins today, but it came out of protests on campus. And we must say this, even though Black students were at the center of those protests, at the same time, you got to remember in the late 1960s, you also had student protests around the Vietnam War. You had a lot of students who were involved in the civil rights movement, had come down south and worked on voter registration campaigns in places like Mississippi and Alabama. And so that type of energy that young people had at that time was an important factor in the development of Black studies in the late 1960s. And actually, the first Black studies program was actually not at a 4-year school, it was at a 2-year school, Merritt College in Oakland, California. And so it was tied to other organizations like the Revolutionary Action Movement, Black Panther Party. Bobby Seale and Huey Newton would be two of those students who would be involved in some of those student protests there. And so it's very much, when you say Black studies and Black politics, it's very much connected to politics. I oftentimes remind my colleagues and remind my students that the academia, and when we say academia, in this sense, we're talking about predominantly white mainstream academia, they weren't offering Black studies. We had to put that on the table. It was one of the things that came from our people. Now, another thing that Black studies did at that particular time is raise the question not only of introducing a curriculum that reflected our people, our experiences, our perspectives, but also they wanted an education that would be relevant to our communities. So Black studies always had a social responsibility component to it. In San Francisco State, when they first started it, every class had some sort of community component where you're working with folks in the community. In most of our programs now, there's some sort of relationship between our departments, our curriculum, and the community. Thing is, now it's called service learning or civic engagement. It's something that's been picked up by the entire university.
And you know, if I could interject, I would be willing to risk to say that coming as a part of Black studies actual spilled over into more of the mainstream traditional disciplines where they began to talk about community engagement, service learning, where that was built into the mission of Black studies at its inception.
I want also, there was something else you mentioned. You said that we were the only field or discipline that came out of protest. But we also must point out that we were the vanguard that led to what women's studies, sexuality studies, Chicano and Latino studies, that Asian studies. So there were
what do they call it? The field. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Other ethnic studies programs came from that, and particularly the social justice orientation that we brought to education. So there's many things that Black studies has contributed. And some people oftentimes ask, it's funny to me today, will ask, students are asked, well, what can I do with a Africana Studies degree?
That's a phenomenal question you always get asked.
And it's funny because sometimes we get asked that question by a philosophy student. Well, the same thing you could do with that philosophy degree, probably more. Probably more you could do with an Africana Studies degree. And so you can look at some of the people who majored or minored in Africana Studies and what they're doing today. People like Aaron Magruder, the cartoonist.
Oh, okay.
People like what's my sister? What's love got to do with it? Help me out, Sundiata. The actress. Yeah, but people like Michelle Obama was a minor in Africana Studies.
Oh, really?
We don't like to claim him all the time, but Christopher Darden, who was the prosecutor, and Angela Bassett, that's what I'm talking about. Thank you. But Christopher Darden, who was the prosecutor in the O.J. Simpson case.
Not the brother that was crying when they lost.
Yeah, no doubt. But and we've had, and I'm sure you all, Wayne, you could say the same thing, that we've had students go to law school. We've had students go to school in public health. We've had students to pursue PhDs in any of the humanities and social sciences. And so, as well as we prepared students for community engagement and who've done nonprofit work. And so there's a series of things you could do with Africana Studies degree.
Right.
And so,
actually,
go ahead.
What you can do with Africana Studies degree is everything that you can do with any degree in social science or humanities. And, I did a couple of studies of Black Studies units, and for those who got a master's in Black Studies, none of them were unemployed.
None of them were.
You said none of them were unemployed.
Almost everybody
yeah.
who got a master's in Africana Studies was employed.
Right.
We have a very strong track record in terms of jobs for our students.
Because I think the question is are we preparing our students to communicate through writing and orally? Are we preparing students in the technology of today? Are we preparing students to think critically? Some of my students have said when they've gone into other programs on a graduate level, say like in public health, they say that they find themselves, and even in law, they find themselves more equipped than people who came from other disciplines because of the grounding and the community engagement, but also the critical thinking and writing skills that we've been able to provide. So that was a question. During the time that our programs were being started back in the late 60s, I know Bayard Rustin was one of the people who opposed Black Studies programs. He argued that it would create a ghettoization of education, but he didn't realize, again, the possibilities. Another thing, though, that I think Black Studies did was to create space.
In academia?
I'm talking about for our students.
Oh, okay.
This was one of the things. Sundiata, a month ago, organized a session at the Association of African American Life and History. And John Bracey, esteemed distinguished scholar from University of Massachusetts, talked about how Black Studies created space on many of our campuses, so Black students would have community. They would have places where they felt comfortable, where they could see themselves reflected, but also they could have professors they could relate to. So this was even for people who didn't major in Black Studies, it meant their success because they had community. And several studies have shown that students do better when they have a community to come to, when they have that type of support.
I think I've read somewhere that Black Studies historically has had more of a presence on the PWIs and the predominantly white institutions. And I think, and I hear this in what you're saying, that this sense of community was created in these all white institutions, which may have served in a similar capacity as the incubator type community you get in an HBCU. So this was a place that students that were not majors could at least come to and see other people they could identify with, and have, in a sense of support to help them get through the system. And I think a lot of us don't, particularly those of us that have not been through the academic process, don't understand the challenges that African American and other students that, and I don't want to say non-white, but other students have having to deal with the mainstream culture and being able to hold on to and retain themselves. And could you maybe talk a little bit about African American studies or related studies in Brazil?
Yes.
I know that's your area of expertise.
One of.
Brazil, yeah.
Right now, Brazil is in political, financial turmoil,
Mm.
and it's a tragic situation because in the last 10, 15 years, Brazil had begun to develop Afro-Brazilian studies programs,
Mm.
implement affirmative action
Mm.
for public universities. So a lot of important advances were made toward diversifying the university community, especially the student population. This is very exciting. Students of African and people of African ancestry, Afro-Brazilians are about half of the Brazilian population, 50%, but they were often less than 10% on university campuses, especially the more prestigious university campuses.
Now, if I could just interject, that sounds similar to how academia looked when Black Studies came into existence in the early 1960s. Now, but I think it's also important to note, and maybe you and Baba Sundiata can comment on that, but it's also important to note when we talk about the history of Black Studies, we're talking about, in this context, the formalized inceptions of this presence appearing in academia, because we know there were scholars doing this work back to W.E.B. Du Bois, Dr. Carson, George Washington Williams, and others. But I just wanted to kind of put that in there so that we're really clear we're making those historical connections and linkages. But go ahead, I'm sorry.
You know, there's that aspect, and the other aspect is that PWIs, one of the things that's really clear is that prior to Black Studies, you have low presence in terms of African American faculty. And if you look at most campuses, the greatest bulk of Black faculty will be located in Black Studies, or they will teach an aspect of Black Studies within a traditional discipline. So Black Studies has really been the mechanism by which we have desegregated U.S. higher education.
That's a good point.
And you know, Barbara, if I could just interject, we were just talking on the way here about how when Black Studies was coming into inception in academia in '68, coming off of the Black Power movement, that a part of the demand or a part of the mission was to, and you said, make a space for people of African descent. But this whole access to academia was part of what the cry or the demand for Black Studies was, to be able to correct the presentation of Black people, or to correct the fact that we were omitted from the historical academic narrative, and also as an inroads into academia. So with that being said, and looking back almost 50 years, a matter of fact, in 2 years we could say it will be celebrating 50 years. How do you think this enterprise has fared over this for almost a half a century? And I find it interesting, and one of the things I wanted to kind of ask you about in the presentation Saturday, but it wasn't really the appropriate place, about the challenges that directors or administrators of these units have. Because I've watched chairs, I'm not going to say any names, that this struggle is like you would have to be in their shoes to really see it. And I say that to say, you would think for Black Studies, when it came into inception, the first professors were actually had to come up with literature and pull literature from places to be able to teach classes. And now we have a plethora of production of literature, which can be seen in the fact that we have at least 17 PhD programs, PhD granting units, which should be ultimately the validating factor for the legitimacy of the field. So
I think, as I mentioned before, we produce some students who've done tremendous work and make tremendous contributions. And that's the most positive element that I think our departments have been able to do, is the service we've been able to do for our students. And as you say, we produce some groundbreaking scholarship. On the other hand, in the climate that we're in, I think higher education itself is going through some shifts, right? There are some questions about funding. I know where I'm at, and I get this from talking to colleagues around the country, that there's a lot of emphasis on now. There's been a corporatization almost of academia, and so a lot of school administrators look at programs that generate revenue to bring in grants, and if you don't bring in the dollars, you're not as valued. And so traditionally we haven't been the units to bring in the same type of grant money that
cancer researchers.
Exactly, in the STEM fields, in the sciences, and computer science in particular. And so we're not as valued in the institutions right now. And we must remember our origins were only there because of our students making a push for us to be included in the academy. And so that's a challenge right now. On the other hand, and I think if we look at last year, if we look at what happened at Missouri in terms of student protests there, that which led to the resignation of their chancellor, I think we could see with that and the rise of this Black Lives Matter movement, we could see increased activism. And as with that, I think the activism, particularly on campus, students are going to begin to again demand that there is a curriculum that reflects their experiences. There's curriculum that reflects social justice, and they're going to again renew their demands for having a relationship with communities, particularly communities of color and communities of people of African descent. So I think there's a possibility to reintroduce this conversation and for us to redouble our efforts to institutionalize Black studies. Without that, I actually don't see it happening. We know that in the last 10 years, there's been assaults on programs all across the United States. There have been attempts to fight that back. I know in California, there were members of the state legislature that put a moratorium on the decrease of funding of Black studies programs, Africana studies programs. You've had issues at Temple University, at Cornell University. So it's a nationwide struggle at this particular time. And so I think we have to be vigilant, and then the community, and which I'm glad that you had us on this program. It's important for the community to weigh in on this.
And
it's important for there was a discussion with elected officials. It's important for our elected officials to weigh in on this, because also one of the things, it's not just about me keeping my job. Studies have shown that students tend to do better if they have a education that reflects their culture, reflects their experience. And so, and we talked about creating those spaces for our students on campus also. Without those spaces, our students won't be as successful. So this is important for, I would say, the continued development of our people, and the continued survival of our people, and the survival of our students on campus. Not only survival, we start with survival, but we want to progress, we want to develop, we want to begin to develop our communities. And we want to be able to have professionals who have a sense of serving the community also. And so it's important that that agenda still be there and that perspective still be on the campuses.
I'd like to reiterate some of those points that Black scholars over the last 30 years, if you look at an area of study like history, most of the book awards have gone to authors who wrote on African American subjects. You can say the same thing in areas like literature. You can say something similar in the case of sociology, so that the knowledge that has been brought in terms of from Black studies has had a phenomenal impact on the academy and on learning. The other piece that we have to be very, very clear about is that access to higher education for black people is tied to black studies. So in the last decade, most of the major universities, we've seen a decline in black students. That we're now back to the basic question of access that we raised in the late 1960s. That we pay taxes and we must have access to these institutions. Right? The other piece is that the most fundamental question, the most vexing question in the United States is the question of racial oppression. It's about the exploitation, subjugation of African American people and other people of color. Black studies, Latino studies, these others are the only space in this country where you can have a dialogue between people of different racial and ethnic backgrounds about the most vexing question in the society. No other space can you have such a dialogue. So the transformation of this society is tied to what comes out of black studies. And we can see that when you begin to look at the most progressive black elected officials, they have a relationship to black studies. Here in Champaign, we're 16% of the population in the county. But we elected a radical black socialist woman to the state legislature. She draws on the expertise of faculty in black studies. And I think that you're going to find that to be almost everywhere in the country, that the most progressive people in our communities have a relationship to black studies.
Let me add that I recently attended the 50th anniversary of the founding of the Black Panther Party in Oakland, California. And it was an inspirational 50th reunion because many of the Black Panthers there were in their late 60s, early 70s, but they all maintained that spirit of struggle. They felt good about the work they had done, but they felt a lot more work was there to be done. And so just as black studies was created in struggle, it continues in struggle. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to emphasize that it's not only a local, state, or national question. African American studies is international. Mm-hmm. We are global people. Mm-hmm. And part of our contribution to knowledge, wisdom, and understanding has been global. Mm-hmm. And we can't forget that. Obviously, you know that as a specialist on Africa, someone who's visited the continent various phases. I said that in Portuguese many times. I'm slipping. But yeah, no, I think the best departments, programs, centers in black studies, African American studies have that international dimension. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we've got to maintain that and prioritize that, because just like we are oppressed here in the United States, our brothers and sisters, our family, are oppressed internationally. Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting.
I want to complicate that a little bit, because I think that that's a very simple.
Barbara, let me just let you know we got 4 minutes left.
So let me say that in this way. That first, black studies always had an internationalist perspective. But in the 60s, the immigrant, the black immigrant population that came into the U.S. was often connected to decolonization movements, liberation movements. One of the ways that we've seen black studies do this way, particularly enforcing it from community struggle, has been through the diasporic approach. Now, we have to be clear, the Ford Foundation and other foundations put up money. Ford Foundation gave $1 million black studies programs, $1 million to 2 or 3 others to switch to the diaspora. And what we saw with that perspective, what we saw with that shift, was a overemphasis on hiring non-African Americans. And oftentimes these programs come under the control of the black bourgeoisie from Africa, from the Caribbean. They shuttle off, and they cut off connections in terms of struggle, and they move to hire only from, or predominantly from, their place. And so we have to be mindful of that contradiction, and we have to be mindful of the contradiction. I was on a panel for the celebration of the PhD program at Louis.
I don't think he can hear me. Barbara, excuse me. Okay, we're down to the last 30 seconds. Oh, we got 1 second. Real quick, we'd like to thank you for 1 minute. Very quickly, 30 seconds to wrap us up and take us out of here. You've been watching Get Up, Stand Up. Any closing comments or remarks? Join us tomorrow at Old Main in room 137 at 10 a.m. for an extended version of the conversation you've heard, a presentation by Dr. Umoja, Black Studies and Black Politics. Any closing comments?
I just want to thank Wayne Studies, Africana Studies Department, and the Charles Wright Museum for hosting me here in Detroit.
And our host and chair of African American Studies, Dr. Johnson.
Thank you so much, Brother Kefentse, for having us here. We have to encourage our students and all students to take courses in African American Studies. We have to continue to deepen the connection between the academy and the community.
Barbara Sundiata, are you still on the line?
Mr. Lawson.
I see him. Okay, well, we like to thank everyone. We say Get Up, Stand Up. You've been watching us on Black in the Day and 313. And I like to say this is the beginning of an ongoing dialogue. We'll revisit this. We thank you for joining us. Hopefully, those of you that can will join us tomorrow. And we'll be back next week at the same time. We say go out and vote. And we conclude by saying Get Up, Stand Up. And if you can hear me, Barbara Sundiata, thank you very much. And I'm sorry we had to cut you short. Get Up, Stand Up. TV 33 WHPR.
A pleasure. Take care.
Peace.
You're watching W33BY, Detroit, Highland Park, Michigan.
The Wayne County Community College District is celebrating 50 years of service to its community.
Detroit Comeback is more than jobs, though jobs are what our people need. It is more than hope, though hope gives us strength. Proposal A will destroy hope and send the future jobs we need out of the city. It is filled with bad ideas and so many loopholes you could drive a truck through. Maybe that's why over 100,000 workers are united in saying Proposal A is, well, awful.
We fix hearts, we fix heads, we do eyes and ears, noses and throats. In fact, more children come to Children's Hospital than any other hospital in the state. Stop the headaches, stop the pain, fix the tummies, the ankles, the toes and fingers.
Emergency? When it's your child, don't settle for less. Trust the pediatric ER experts at the Children's Hospital of Michigan at the DMC. The ER at Children's Hospital.
Always there, just for them.
Emergency? When it's your child, don't settle for less. Trust the pediatric ER experts at the Children's Hospital of Michigan at the DMC. The ER at Children's Hospital.
Always there, just for them. Children's bodies are different from adults. Bones still growing, bodies still developing. That's why Children's is different from an adult hospital. No wonder more children come to Children's Hospital than any other hospital in the state.
Emergency? When it's your child, don't settle for less. Trust the pediatric ER experts at the Children's Hospital of Michigan at the DMC. The ER at Children's Hospital.
Always there, just for them.
Bon Appetit, food you can't resist. Come out every Saturday for Bon Appetit. We have fish, Bon Appetit dry rub ribs, and grilled chicken. That's